This is Felt Recoil.
Now, welcome to the Felt Recoil podcast. This is episode number 71. My name is Chris. Across from me, P-Mag Hulon. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. What's happening?
Just fighting the liberals, trying to take my guns and my Second Amendments each and every day. We'll get there.
Sounds like a full-time job.
Yeah, pretty much is. It's what I do at work, even though I'm paid to do other things. Let's start with our charity of choice for this week. A Louisiana police chief. This is an article from today, about 4 o'clock on this Wednesday, March 28th, as we record this podcast. A police chief from Evangeline Parish was stabbed in the face while making an arrest, according to KPLC and NOLA.com. Turkey Creek Police Chief Robert Leggett attempted to arrest Zachary Shane DeVille, 24, I'm sure he's Mormon, on a charge of criminal trespassing, but wound up stabbed in the left cheek by DeVille, authorities said. Now, if you're not familiar, it could reach a point where this police chief's insurance and department no longer cover his bills. So he's out doing his job. Some ne'er-do-well decides to take a swipe, gets him in the face with a knife, and then he's out on his own to cover his medical expenses and rent or mortgage, car payment, whatever he's got. So there is a fund that helps officers within Greenville County called the Greenville War Fund, and we encourage you to support the nonprofit that exists to benefit sheriff's deputies injured in the line of duty. It is possible for the officer's insurance and department to not cover all expenses incurred. So please visit greenvillewarfund.com. Greenville, W-A-R fund.com, greenvillewarfund.com, and help the cops keep fighting the good fight. Now, I have quite a few things to get to before we get into the stories. We're going to talk about former Supreme Court Justice Stevens' opinion on repealing the Second Amendment, which will never happen. It's nearly impossible that will ever happen. It's probably the only thing Donald Trump's been right on in weeks, but it will not happen. It takes a lot to make that happen. I think it's a 2/3 vote in Congress, and then 2/3 of each state's legislature must also agree, and it will not happen. It will not happen.
But
they want it. Right.
The kid said
it should.
that we need to do that.
How can we not? I want to correct the record on a couple of things before we really get into it. Okay. I've been listening lately to a podcast called This Is War. If you're not listening to it, you should be. But the thing about podcasts is everyone can have one. Look at me. And sometimes we say things that aren't exactly right, even though we have the best of intentions.
Still looking at you.
Sometimes we say things that aren't exactly right. So if you're listening to This Is War and you enjoy this podcast, then there's a major error in the latest This Is War episode where they're covering a soldier who was inspired to become an airborne medic because he watched Band of Brothers and fell in love with the Eugene Rowe character of Band of Brothers. And the host of This Is War, whose name I don't know, seems to go out of his way to note that Eugene Rowe was a fictional character, except he's not. But multiple times it is said in the This Is War podcast that Eugene Rowe was a fictional character and this is a fictional TV show. I think anybody that has seen it should understand that Band of Brothers is pretty much based on fact. I'm sure they played loose for the sake of drama and certain things, but these are real people.
Yeah, but for dialogue, probably not.
Right.
Not real historical events.
Good way to say it. Dick Winters was a real man. He's a real hero. He's an amazing man, as is everyone else that's highlighted in a Band of Brothers episode. So I just wanted to point out Eugene Rowe was a retired construction contractor. He died in 1998. He was 76 and a native of Louisiana. He was a U.S. Army veteran of World War II. He served in the European theater during World War II, participating in the D-Day invasion of Normandy as a paratrooper and medic in the E Company, 101st Airborne Division. He also served with Allied forces defending Bastogne, Belgium, in the Battle of the Bulge. He received the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and the Medal of Valor for his services to our country. And he passed away in 1898. An amazing man. And I just think it's worth noting here at the top that that's a guy who did exist, who really did contribute to making America as wonderful as it is. And I don't want to be melodramatic about it, but I find it rather sad. I mean, if you're going to do a documentary-style podcast on war, it would behoove you to make sure that the people you call fictional actually are fictional, because that's a real guy, a real hero. Let's not try to mess that up. But if you happen to be listening to it and you wondered, there's your answer. He was a real dude. And I messaged them. This is kind of annoying. I messaged them on Facebook. I said, hey, love the podcast. I've listened to all 3 episodes. FYI, Eugene Rowe was a real guy. Here's a link to his bio. And then I got an automated message that basically said, thanks for reaching out to us. If you'd like to share your story of combat with us, email this. And I thought, okay, understand they have a job to do, but also you should probably be aware you're misinforming people. So what the other thing that does is it kind of calls into question all his narratives that he adds between the stories of the soldiers, because he does that a lot. Either way, okay.
I could see how that could wane your credibility a little bit.
There is a lot going on against the gun culture this week. Former Justice Stevens wants to repeal the Second Amendment, and he bases it largely on the fact that when the founders met in Philadelphia, they said, this will all stand unless anyone's 17-year-old son disagrees.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of these guys, by the way, were closer to 17 then than they are to my age, right? I'm 37 years old. Our founders were in their mid-20s, early 20s, and late teens when they were writing our founding documents. And one of the things they did in our founding documents was to enshrine the fact that America would exist on the idea that all men are created equal and are therefore endowed by their creator with inalienable rights that could not be infringed upon by the government. And so when they wrote the Constitution, the idea was not, here's the things we think people deserve. It was, here's what people have a right to that cannot be chilled or infringed or stepped on by the federal government. Seems to be this perverse belief these days, especially from people like Justice Stevens and the kids that are out protesting. There's a belief that is rampant that everything in the Bill of Rights is subject to the feelings of others, right? And one of the rally cries we're seeing these days...
Well, emphasis on feelings.
Right. Yes, exactly. Highlight it in yellow, underline it, put it in bold. And here's what really blows my mind. Let's read the Stevens opinion. See what I did? Because he's on the Supreme Court.
You went there.
Yeah, so he's in the New York Times. And he says, this is great. There's so much wrong here. We'll try to deconstruct it, and then I'm going to paint you a big picture of why all this is a problem. A big picture proven with things that are actually happening. Okay, ready? Follow along. By John Paul Stevens, March 27th, 2018 in the New York Times. Rarely in my lifetime have I seen the type of civic engagement school children and their supporters demonstrated in Washington and other major cities throughout the country this past Saturday. By the way, P.S. The people that marched represented not even 1% of this country's population. Not even half of 1%, really. Well, just about half of 1%. So it's half a percentage point of Americans in the streets demanding policy change for the other 99.5% of Americans. Of that half of a percent, by the way, less than 10% were children under the age of 18. Okay?
What?
Yeah.
Hang on a second.
It's almost as if you've been lied to, Hulon. It's almost as if the media has led you to believe something that's absolutely not true. Can you believe that?
No.
It's a hard thing to take, isn't it?
Because I was pretty sure that everyone that was there was 14.
Right. You would think. Here's Emma Gonzalez with her Cuban communist flag on her jacket, screaming about, let's take away your guns. So what? So you can murder the gays like Che and Fidel did? So what? So you can gouge my eyes out with spoons when I write dissenting opinions about your governing style, which is what Che and Fidel did? Okay? And by the way, it's not Chris Vermillion telling you that. It's a gay journalist who left the country when Bush was elected and wrote a book called While Europe Slept, all about what's actually happening in this world and the ignorance to basic history of the Western world that is perpetually evident in America's youth these days. It's absolutely unbelievable. But I digress. Back into this. Okay. So it wasn't civic engagement by school children and their supporters. And if you are supporting the opinions of school children, you have a mental incompetency issue that you and I need to talk about, because your children shouldn't drive your opinion. Okay? You should be there to listen to your children's opinions and then say whether or not you agree, but also, I think, no matter what, to challenge them with differing views so that their opinions are well thought out.
Their argument, though, these children, is that they survived this tragedy. And so, therefore, they are now the expert.
Policy expert, because something bad happened to me.
I have been in a car wreck before.
Yeah.
That incident
That's
did not
how
make me a mechanic.
But it is how you got your job designing highways. Because that is what you do now, right?
No, sir.
You are out there advocating. Oh, no?
No.
Well, I was in a gas station that was robbed before I was even 11 years old. I think I was younger than probably 9, and watched a gentleman punch a lady and steal a cash register, and scared the bejesus out of me. And I ran next door to my mom's office. We'd walk next door to the 7-Eleven, which I think was called Little Champ at the time, if anybody remembers. And anyway, guy punched the lady.
How old are you?
I'm 37, I just said. And he punched the lady, stole the cash register, and ran out. And I talked to the detectives and gave her a really good description. And before you knew it, I was running the Jacksonville, Florida Police Department's detective office.
Nice.
Because here I was, a victim of a crime, and I was now the de facto expert, because none of the detectives in there, albeit they had studied many, many, many more crimes than I ever will. That aside,
You got some real world expertise there.
I was the only one in the room. I was the only one in the room that had watched this exact scenario play out. And so I began a Sharia law campaign to chop off hands so women could no longer be punched in the face, which is what began my studies into the Islamic faith at a young age. Most of that is true. Some of it there at the end is not. But all right. Are we ever going to read this opinion? We are right now. Here we go. All right. So back to Stevens. He says, quote, "These demonstrations demand our respect." Like I said, there's a lot of stupid here, so I'm going to slow my roll on trying to pick it all apart. They reveal the broad public support for legislation to minimize the risk of mass killings of school children and others in our society. Again, the numbers speak for themselves. There's not broad public support. This was less than 0.5% of the American public. And of that 0.5%, 10% of them were under the age of 18.
Again, I'll give you that they weren't all kids. However, CNN told me everybody was there.
You're right.
Everybody.
Yes, sir.
In fact, I got from the Greenville Police Department right here. They have an app. I downloaded it, and they give you traffic updates, and if there's something big going on, they give you a heads up. It's nice.
I tell you, stay out of the way.
Because I live downtown, so I use it a pretty good bit. Well, I got an alert basically saying that they shut down, essentially, from their verbiage, most of downtown.
Oh,
They
yeah.
just shut it down
Okay.
for this march. 65,000-ish people live in Greenville. Sound
In
about
the
right?
actual city?
Yeah, does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I would say in the greater area, just to be fair.
In the county, it's probably a lot more. But go ahead. I'm listening.
My point is, how many people were actually there that they needed to shut all of downtown down? Probably not that many.
61,650 in Greenville City.
Okay, well, there you go.
As of 2014. I would say, here's the thing. It's not a peaceful protest if we have to shut down our streets for an entire city. That's not peaceful, okay?
Also, very grassroots that there was one of these in every city.
Yeah, very much so,
same
right?
time.
Right, yeah.
I just want to point that out.
Delta Airlines flying in protesters, totally organic. Okay. The former justice, thank God, goes on and says the support is a clear sign to lawmakers to enact legislation prohibiting civilian ownership of semi-automatic weapons. Hang on to that. I'm going to come back to it, okay? And I'm not even worried about semi-automatic. I'm worried about civilian. That support is a clear sign to lawmakers to enact legislation prohibiting civilian ownership of semi-automatic weapons, increasing the minimum age to buy a gun from 18 to 21, and establishing more comprehensive background checks on all purchases of firearms. But the demonstrators should seek more effective and more lasting reform. They should demand a repeal of the Second Amendment. All right, let's take that paragraph and dissect it here. I have a massive problem. And if I haven't been clear enough about this, I just want to say it again. The legislatures are the people. The military is the people. They are all volunteers who give their time and effort to either represent or protect the people. It does not put them on some magical hierarchy just because they choose to do that. And to tell me that the military or the police are allowed to have weapons that I'm not allowed to have is a step towards tyranny, and it is a step towards not the repeal of the Second Amendment, but the First. Okay? A complete repeal of the First Amendment is immediate if they take the Second Amendment from us. And I know everybody tells you that, but let me digress and tell you two things real fast from Breitbart.com. 22-year-old conservative commentator Lauren Southern has been banned for life from the United Kingdom. Now, she's a Canadian citizen, so she is still a subject to the crown by law. She's a subject to the British crown. She is now banned from the United Kingdom for life for conducting a social experiment on Islamic attitudes to homosexuality and transgenderism in England. The 22-year-old hails from Canada, which is one of the Commonwealth realms and continues to share a head of state with the UK and Queen Elizabeth II, making the move to ban her particularly unusual. She was recently detained in France. Is that Calais? Calais? Thank you. I don't speak coward. In Calais, France, a popular launchpad for thousands of illegal migrants seeking to enter Britain. Under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act, she was detained shortly after Austrian identitarian activist Martin Sellner and American YouTube commentator Brittany Pettibone received similar treatment. This was despite a police officer who told her father openly they did not actually suspect her of being a terrorist. Now, here's where it all ties together. It all began, says Lauren, a couple of weeks ago when I reread a Vice article, by the way, a far-left publication here in the States, which claimed that Jesus Christ led his life as a gay man. I was intrigued by the article, not necessarily because I thought there was any validity to it. I think the notion is a little ridiculous. But as I carried on my day after reading it, I couldn't help but think that I didn't recall much backlash when the article came out. Maybe there were a few posts here and there, but there were no protests, no religious leaders condemning Vice. So what does she do? Well, she goes to a largely Muslim area. I think it's called Luton, Luton, in the United Kingdom, and basically holds a Allah is gay rally. And she described how she then decided to conduct the experiment to see what would happen if we played the role of an LGBT social justice warrior activist and set up a stall to celebrate LGBT diversity within the Islamic community. Basically, it plays out that she's handing out these flyers that says Allah is gay. She didn't even take on Muhammad, by the way. She'd have probably been dead immediately had she done Muhammad.
More than likely.
But she says God is gay, essentially. And the crowd turns hostile almost immediately. She's detained, told to pull the stall down, and is now banned for life from the United Kingdom, where they took everybody's guns so that nobody would shoot anybody else and school shootings would stop. All of that in air quotes there at the end, right? None of that is true. It's about control, control, control. And here's
awfully stabby over there, though.
Awfully stabby. Save a life. Give up your knife, right? Here's the great fallacy of what they've done. They've created an environment where they want everyone to believe they're safe because the government will come and protect you. And the great fallacy of Islam, really the lie of it all, is they've convinced everybody that we're largely peaceful, but there's a parenthetical phrase to that, and that is until you piss us off. Islam can be a religion of peace until you make them angry. Muslims, Muhammad himself, can live peacefully among differing people and tribes and belief systems until those other people, tribes, and belief systems contradict the Islamic faith. Okay, that's what's called dhimitude. You could look up DHIMMI, read about it all over Google, and that is the subjected state of non-believers in the Islamic countries. Okay, so when Islam takes the majority by violence every time throughout history, they then subjugate you to a position of servitude to them. You can't openly worship. You can't build houses taller than a Muslim man can touch the top. It's all very strange and backward and archaic, like the Muslim faith, and they treat you as a subject to Islam. Now, how does all that tie in? Because it quickly follows a repeal of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment goes away. There are no guns there. Now, your speech is strongly regulated by the state. You cannot be critical of Islam. You cannot offend people who largely disagree with you. So what do you have? You have anarchy. You have mob rule, right? By
Sure.
What did you say earlier? By your feelings.
Right.
Highlight your feelings. Okay. Let's continue on with it. So hard to keep up. That decision. So Stephen says, and this, God bless this stupid man. All right. We'll go to here. Concern that a national standing army might pose a threat to the security of the separate states led to the adoption of the Second Amendment, which provides that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Today, that concern is a relic of the 18th century. For over 200 years after the adoption of the Second Amendment, it was uniformly understood as not placing any limit on either federal or state authority to enact gun control legislation. Okay. I don't know if you call this a self-fulfilling prophecy or if it's just a paradox. That's not a paradox because that's a seeming contradiction, right? This is a contradictory statement. This statement contradicts itself. So whatever the term is for that, listen to this. Listen. So they should demand to repeal the Second Amendment. Listen to this part. Concern that a national standing army might pose a threat to the security of the separate states led to the adoption of the Second Amendment. Today, that concern is a relic of the 18th century. This phrase, literally in the middle of the statement of a man who is calling for the national army to enter into the states and take the guns of the free people. He says the concern is a relic of the 18th century. Does that not prove the argument against him is that we own guns to protect against tyrannical forms of government, and he tells us that idea is outdated, so just give up your guns to the army that's coming to get them.
Right. You should just go along with the tyranny, and it'll be fine. I promise.
He proves everything he says is not true by saying the government should repeal the Second Amendment and come and take your guns. I don't know what the term is for that outside of absurd.
Stupid.
Stupid. It's a good one. All right. For over 200 years after the adoption of the Second Amendment, it was uniformly understood as not placing any limit. In 1939, the Supreme Court unanimously held that Congress could prohibit the possession of a sawed-off shotgun because that weapon had no reasonable relation to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. During the years when Warren Burger was the Chief Justice from 69 to 86, no judge, federal or state, as far as I'm aware, expressed any doubt as to the limited coverage of that amendment. When organizations like the NRA disagreed with that position and began their campaign claiming that federal regulations of firearms curtailed Second Amendment rights, Chief Justice Burger publicly characterized the NRA as perpetrating, quote, one of the greatest pieces of fraud. I repeat the word fraud on the American public by special interest groups that I've ever seen in my lifetime, in that quote. Stevens still continues. In 2008, the Supreme Court overturned Chief Burger and others' long-settled understanding of the Second Amendment limited reach by ruling in D.C. versus Heller that there was an individual right to bear arms. I was among the 4 dissenters. That decision, which I remain convinced was wrong and certainly was debatable, has provided the NRA with a propaganda weapon of immense power. Overturning that decision via a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Second Amendment would be simple and would do more to weaken the NRA's ability to stymie legislative debate and block constructive gun control legislation than any other available option. Now, let's talk for a second about Dred Scott, because if the litmus test here is should things be right or wrong based on what SCOTUS says. Now, remember, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, is 9 unelected people. These are people you and I do not get a vote on. There's no telling what the president will say. And this is really basically ruled by fiat, right? This is a decree from the president where he says this person should sit on the nation's highest court, which, by the way, gave itself the authority of constitutional review, okay? Judicial oversight. There was no such thing. There's nothing as constitutional review for the Supreme Court in the Constitution itself, right?
Right.
The Supreme Court is not intended to tell you that laws are unconstitutional. They can tell you now that they are or are not, because in Marbury versus Madison, they decided they had judicial review. That was not supposed to be a thing, okay? It was intended to be the nation's highest court to settle matters. It was not intended to have oversight of the legislative branch as it passed laws. Okay, now, where were we going? The whole point is, oh yes, SCOTUS, Dred Scott.
Dred Scott. Yep.
The Dred Scott case, in case you don't know, was where the Supreme Court of the United States said that when the founders, this is very important, the decision states that when the founders wrote the Constitution in our founding documents and that they said all men are created equal, and these are their words, when they said all men are created equal, they meant all white men. That was the view of the Supreme Court at the time of Dred Scott. And they said black people are second-class people underneath white people, and that the founders understood that, and when they wrote men, they meant white men. Now, it's important that the founders didn't write white men. They wrote all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. All men. You could certainly argue that they didn't include women. That would make more sense than arguing that they only meant white men, right?
Sure, I'll buy that.
All right. So here's where the Supreme Court was way off base. But you know what they said about Dred Scott in the Dred Scott decision was that by conferring rights to black people, they would be allowed to do things like vote and own guns because they would now be American citizens. So even in the worst Supreme Court decision we've probably ever seen in our life, in the history of the country, worst Supreme Court decision ever, they are acknowledging that men have an inalienable right to own firearms, but their logic was only white men. So Dred Scott couldn't be free because of the Missouri Compromise, and they ruled the Missouri Compromise in Dred Scott as being unconstitutional, which they shouldn't have been allowed to do. So if SCOTUS wouldn't have given themselves judicial review, black people would have more easily been free because it was already the law of the land. The legislators were already ruling that black people should be free in the United States, and the Missouri Compromise basically suggested that certain states would be free states and certain states could remain slave states. I haven't read up on it in a while, so I'm a little fuzzy on that, but that was the overall point was we'll compromise on where we go from here, and it was largely to develop free states inside of the Union. Making sense? Okay. So this is why it's important that A, we just all agreed John Paul Stevens is an idiot, and then B, why when someone tells you they're not coming for all your guns, remember that they are. Okay? So a former justice on the very liberal Supreme Court has said we need to repeal the Second Amendment. We need to take all semi-automatic firearms away from civilians, which puts you in the middle of a police state, which is supposedly what all these people are against.
Well, it's going to be my point. You know, these are the same people saying that, the police are out of control. You know, they're shooting people in the street for no reason, especially young black men. But yet, nobody else needs guns. Let's only let them have them.
Yeah.
And let's let that be. What's the next argument? After that, is it just police don't need guns either?
I guess. Yeah. I mean,
well, that's sort of how Britain is, right?
I will tell you what the argument it is, and that's very well in Britain. Yeah, I guess you're exactly right. The police don't even have guns, and although
I see more and more pictures of them with guns, and usually it's not a pistol on their hip.
Right.
They're usually decked out in SWAT gear.
Yeah.
London's getting a little dicey over there.
Very dicey, that's for sure. Here's the thing. I know I go on and on about this, but it is indicative of this mindset they have. You know, it seems to be the liberal side of America, the left, that is largely pushing for academics. You cannot be successful if you don't have a college degree. You can't be successful if you didn't go to college. All the high-paying jobs require degrees, even though that's not true. There's especially you look at teachers. There's this myth that teachers should have to have all this education because you need a master's degree to teach third grade math. Just absolutely not true. Shouldn't be the case. We need to reform that. We need to fix that so that people that have a heart to serve in our schools can do so without a mountain of debt going in. Okay? I'm not saying teachers are dumb or that they don't need to be smart. I'm just saying if we look at it pragmatically, it doesn't take a master's to teach geography to a 9-year-old or 2 + 2. That's why homeschooling is becoming so popular, is because kids are learning better in the homes because we've overrun our schools. Okay, we're trying to prop up all the kids who are here illegally, all the poor kids whose parents don't contribute on purpose. Okay, and on it could go. My point is, the left wants you to go be indoctrinated for 4 years with this mentality of Plato and Aristotle, that only a few are capable of ruling the masses. And you have to have these philosopher kings. Go read Plato's Republic, and that's what it's all about, right? Is Socrates sitting around explaining to people that really what we have to do is lie. We have to lie, and we have to evaluate children as they're born, quickly decide what their lot in life will be, and then relegate them to that for eternity. And if people don't like that, we can kill them. We can move along, and they can go work in the fields. They can be slave labor, whatever the case may be. So that is a popular notion. It is a popular notion that the majority of people are stupid when it comes to the left's way of thinking. That's why the left believes that they should be around. They should be allowed to go out and do mindless dribble things like, opine on movies and entertainment and be the Kim Kardashians of the world, a life that requires zero thought and zero foresight, and leave the government government.
It simply requires an opinion, not a good one.
Right.
Just an opinion.
Just a loud mouth and an opinion.
Well, and feelings. Again, not to harp on it, but
no, but that's it is the defining factor between the left and the right, is that the left governs by feelings and the right governs by facts. It's just always been that way. Not all the time, but it's a good dividing line. If you talk to somebody and they go, well, we should treat transgender people as equals and they're just like us, you go, well, are you sure? Because study after study suggests they have a mental deficiency, that there's something wrong in their head. Hey, that's not nice to say. You don't say things like that. I'm talking science. You're talking the way you feel. I'm talking science. I'm looking at the data and telling you this is what it suggests is true. So the left wants all of us to be subjects to their whims and to whatever popular majority tyranny believes at the time. This notion that when people, 2 million people take to the streets on a coordinated Saturday, and John Paul Stevens says, see, this means we should change policy. We should rewrite the Bill of Rights because this many people are worked up about it. Well, that's majority tyranny, even though it's not the majority, but it is majority tyranny. That's why we're a republic and not a democracy. It's because you shouldn't have a group of people, you shouldn't have 9 people who say being a Christian should be illegal and subjugate that one Christian to that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Oppression. Okay? That Christian should still be allowed to live his own life as long as he doesn't hurt anybody else. That's a republic, right? That's the way we're laid out to work.
I guess my question is, what's the end game? So in other words,
power.
Well, no, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the end game in terms of where does it go? So let's say you're one of these people that and we'll use the gun argument, for example. You want to take guns away. So you're all up in arms, and you're in favor
I see what you did there.
Of mob rule.
Yes.
Okay? So then we take the guns away. And then the next whatever, big thing, we have to, mob rule then ensues again. attacks that. The media jumps all over it. We take that away. And we keep on infringing on not necessarily people's rights in terms of the Constitution, but just the way they live their lives, for example.
Sure.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you keep doing that, and you keep doing that, you keep doing that. At what point does that mob rule finally go, oh, man, but I don't like that?
Right.
And then it becomes...
It eats itself?
Well, right. The monster ends up eating its own self.
Yeah.
I don't know where that is in terms of how do we get to that point, or if we would. I hope we don't. I hope these people are, we move on with our lives, and it's, again, using the argument with the guns, that sort of fades into the distance. I don't know that it will
in
our lifetime, but my point is I just don't know, at what point do those people, what would be so important in their life that they would think of it the way that you and I think about our guns?
Gotcha.
I
It's a great
don't
question.
know the answer.
Well, it should be marriage. It should be gay marriage. And we should draw the equivalent to them that, hey, look, you fought for so long to get marriage to be a constitutional right, even though it's not outlined. Okay, the 10th Amendment should regulate that. Okay, it's not the job of the federal government to define marriage. It's just not. And anything not expressly written in the Constitution is left to the states to decide. That's what the 10th Amendment says. Anything not enumerated in the Constitution, the states will decide. That's marriage. Okay, that's marriage. But through, again, the Supreme Court and its perversion, the left got gay marriage acknowledged as a civil right. Okay, fine, you have it. You have it. Now, imagine if there's a massive movement from the right to take gay marriage from you, can you understand that that's the same as you trying to take our guns? No, because we're here to save lives. Okay, then we want your cars. As absurd as the argument is, it's the only thing I can find that really proves the point. Then we want your cars. We need common sense car reform because distracted driving is killing an exponential number of children every year. Every day, every hour, children are dying because of distracted driving, with a large, disproportionate representation of kids aged between 16 and 19 years old. The kids that we're supposed to believe are so worried about being safe in school are being killed at an alarming rate by distracted driving. Disproportionate to any other age group, okay? People 26 and above, not so much. People 16 and 19, all the time. So stop lecturing us about things on which you have no clue. And here's the other part of it. I firmly believe that gun control advocates are very privileged people because you don't really see the poor and disenfranchised in the streets protesting for gun control. You might catch a mom whose son was killed by a gang, but as a large point and a large slice of that demographic, I think the large, and I don't know this is just me giving you my opinion here, I would bet dollars to donuts that they're above average middle class white kids who are out there calling for gun reform legislation. We need the guns off the streets because it's killing innocent people.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly because the people that I know that are for it are predominantly well-to-do, and have been raised in a bubble.
Right.
It's never wanted for anything.
Right.
You know,
it's the correlation of, I don't know if I've ever said this on here, but here it goes. It's the correlation of liberal women having father issues. You start keeping track in your head, and I guarantee you, every woman you meet who is a bleeding heart liberal is either from a broken home or had a terrible relationship with her father. And you're going,
are we talking about Stormy Daniels? or is this a different...
I guarantee you, I would guarantee you that every porn star on the planet has some sort of daddy issue of some sort. Largely terrible daddy issues, by the way. I mean, the worst you can imagine daddy issues. But I mean, when I watch and I do inventory of my head of the women in my life I know that are massive bleeding heart liberals, they all came from broken homes or didn't know their fathers. And I'm not talking the young, enthusiastic, college-age liberal. I'm talking the grown adult 35 to 40, still living in a state of denial, father-daddy issues, bleeding heart liberals. So go out there and poll those women in the streets, and I guarantee you come back going, yeah, actually, he's probably right. But the largest slice of that pie of the kids protesting, so take that 10% of the 2 million, so these 200,000 kids that are out there 18 and under, I guarantee you the vast majority of them come from high-income, middle-class homes. And the point I'm making is violence has never kicked down their door. It's never happened. Every liberal, or you could almost say this, most conservatives in the world are simply liberals that got mugged at one point. You know what I'm saying? Because it's very nice.
Again, are we talking about taxes?
Yes.
Or
either way you slice it. Yeah, probably. Because
just looking for some clarification.
well,
that's all.
There's probably a fine parallel to draw there. You think of the rich kids that come up in the world, and mommy and daddy hand them everything, versus the rich kids that come up in the world, and mom and daddy say, "My money is my money. You go work for your money." Okay, Donald Trump would be a great example of that. His dad gave him a bunch of money, helped him start off, but then there's other people who had to go out and bootstrap it, like the rest of us, and do for themselves. Not to say people don't get a hand from their parents occasionally, but most of us have gone out and bootstrapped for ourselves. We remember what it was like to have milk crate end tables and coffee tables. We remember those kind of things. But the spoiled rich kids of the world, they look around and they go, well, everybody should have what I had. Things can just be provided to you. You shouldn't be working for things. Someone has more money, and you deserve it just by the nature of your existence. So, yeah, there's correlation.
And I would say that to the point of those people growing up in a bubble, while they claim that they want to take our guns for the sake of everyone's safety, and they want to make a big deal out of the shooting in Florida. What they don't want to make a big deal out of is Chicago.
Right.
How is that not on the news at all? Mm-hmm. Every 18 minutes and 35 seconds, someone is murdered in Chicago with a gun.
Daggum.
Every 18 minutes.
Because here's another way you have to turn your emotions off and think logically. It's because people, by nature, are not empathetic to people that don't remind them of themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Now,
again, we're still talking about those people in the bubble.
absolutely. And as mature adults, as a father of 3, I feel slightly like I can look at Chicago and have empathy towards the parents. I could never truly empathize because I've never lost a child, thank God, knock on wood. But I can remember watching my children suffer. I can remember the surgery on my oldest son. I can remember the fact that my middle child was born 6 weeks early, and we spent 3 weeks, I think, in the NICU watching tubes inside this just tiny little human. And it's heartbreaking and it's sad and it's hard to do, but I never had to give them up. But I can remember struggles with my children. I can remember seeing them in pain. I cannot begin to imagine what that's like to watch them die and go away. But a sliver of me feels like maybe there's a sliver of empathy for the mothers and fathers in Chicago. However, the violence is it's not race related, it's culture. There's this culture of broken homes. There's a culture where resisting police and hating authority is idolized. And that is the hip hop culture, white or black, Eminem or Jay-Z. The culture suggests that the police, i.e., people in authoritative positions in life, people, by the way, that a peaceful society has decided should have the job of maintaining the peace, they're demeaned, there's disdain for them, they're hated in that community, and then the community runs around and kills each other and puts its hands up in the air like, why is nobody helping us? Because you haven't helped yourselves largely. You haven't helped yourselves, and your government's certainly not doing you any favors by taking away your means of protection. We all saw Condoleezza Rice on morning television saying, I remember being in Alabama and my father having to have a shotgun and patrol the streets because the KKK and these Midnight Rider guys were out there, whatever they're called. They're out there riding around, taunting, humiliating, murdering, and torturing black people, largely, by the way, to suppress the conservative vote. Never forget that when Jefferson Davis left the Senate to start the Confederacy, when he took the job as president of the Confederacy, it was a black Republican that took his seat. Never, ever, ever forget that key historical fact, because that is the dividing line. The Confederacy was away here. The rest of the world had moved on, and they were willing to allow black people places of elected power. And the point is, KKK. So when you get that argument, people, well, the KKK, I mean, that wasn't a democratic. Yes, it was. It's a democratic organization, and you can prove that by Jefferson Davis was a Democrat. Everybody that left to start the Confederacy was a Democrat, and the people that were replacing them were black Republicans. So those are facts. They can be researched and looked up. Read David Barton's American History in Black and White. It's all in there. But not to get too far away from the point, this is what's wrong now is we've turned into the society of, well, now we put our hands up and go, well, what do we do? Well, stop electing people who promise you safety and happiness for the sake of your liberty. Stop electing people that tell you you can't have guns, but we'll give you free Wi-Fi.
But we have a generation of people that's all they want. And so how do you deal with that? What will be the catalyst to wake people up to where free Wi-Fi is suddenly not the greatest priority? I remember what happened after 9/11. I remember the country coming together, right?
Yeah.
And not. I mean, I know it sounds a little sappy, but I'm bringing that up because, I don't remember the country, and maybe it was because I was a little bit young and a little bit naive. I don't remember the country being terribly divided before it. But what I do remember is that we really came together after it.
Yeah.
And then look at where we are now and how everyone is just, and I think I talked about this the other week on the show, was talking about how just absolutely self-centered people are. And it's not about, I wouldn't even say it's about the greater good. It's about whatever my priority is right this second.
Yeah, me. So I think the answer is found in a tweet by Rob Schneider, who said, turn off the TV, stop watching the news, and get outside and meet your neighbors. And I think that is the answer. I think you got to stop watching the news, man. Whether you're a fan of Fox News or CNN, I just think they're just driving, the divide. They're driving, I want to say discord. I don't think that's the right word. Maybe it is. Yeah, discord among the population. They are the peddlers of panic, of hate, of all things bad. I mean, even now, go visit your local media's website and notice how everything's negative. Everything has a negative slant. Everything is something's wrong here. Somebody did this and it's a terrible thing. But all of that is only news because it's so infrequent. Just like the school shootings, just like serial killers. Serial killers are so rare that they get all the attention and they terrify everybody. Murder is incredibly rare, and 93% of the time that someone is murdered, it's by somebody they know. So the idea that you're just walking down the street and get yourself killed,
got my eye on you, Vermillion.
That's most likely the scenario. He wanted to host the podcast by himself, so he murdered Vermillion. Wow, what a horrible ambition. So the point being, we have to get out in the streets, meet our neighbors, and then they honest to God have to meet more people like my wife. More people who are self-starters, more people who really defied all what the left would call common sense and logic, Again, they tell you got to go to college to be successful. You got to do this to get this job. My wife decided like 6-7 years ago probably that she wanted to design websites. She thought it sounded fun. And she was in sales at the time, and she was applying for jobs, and she said, you know what I'll do? I'll get on YouTube and I'll figure it out. And she started watching YouTube videos about how to design websites, and she started entering freelance competitions, and it took a little while. She started winning them, and she was making money by designing websites for people on the hope that they would buy them, that in the end she'd win the contest on 99 designs and somebody would buy the website. She did that long enough that she could then go into places with a portfolio and go, hey, I saw your website. It's not so good. Why don't you hire me? I'm 1/10 of the cost of the big dogs, and I'll build your website for you. And people go, okay. So she'd make a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. And she grew and grew and grew until finally, she can ask what she wants to ask for a website, and people pay it nowadays. So what is the point? The point is she couldn't go get a job at firms in town. She couldn't. If she left right now and tried to go get a job at most design firms, they wouldn't hire her because she doesn't have a college degree. But she makes the majority of our income simply based on deciding to do something by getting up and doing it. And had she listened to everybody in the media and everyone in the classrooms across America, she would believe you have to go to college, get a degree, and make yourself better. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting a college degree, but I am saying it could largely be a waste of your time. It could very largely be a waste of your time. My kids will not be allowed to go to college unless they can tell me exactly what they want to do. They're going to have to say, well, Dad, I'm 19 and I know that I want to do this. Because if they can't, I'm going to go, listen to me. Save yourself the trouble. Go out into the world, work a few different jobs, figure out what you like about them, what you don't. If you decide I want to do this and college helps that, then do it. I'm going to tell you right now, you'll pull 6 figures working a job with 5 years experience under your belt a lot quicker than you'll pull 6 figures straight out of college. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is.
I think that's the myth that's been perpetrated to America's youth is that if you go get that degree, you're set for life. And
you walk out into some big paying job.
I think I've dealt with a lot of those people in my career because they think that that's the answer to get them out of an hourly wage when they already don't have the drive to do that job for the hourly wage.
Yeah.
So it's almost, it's kind of laughable to me that they think, well, I'll just go get this degree, and that's the easy way to get it done. And then they've essentially spun their wheels.
There's also a myth, I think, associated with college degrees that you're intelligent because you have one. You know what I'm saying?
I have met people with PhDs that I'm fairly well convinced they couldn't tie their shoes if I asked them to. So, and that's no offense to anyone. I mean, there's plenty of really smart people out there with degrees and without.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think that makes you better than someone else.
Well, I remember being in a political theory class in college, and we were studying the philosophies of all these different political theorists, right? And I couldn't even tell you their names now because it just was so in one ear and out the other because it's just a bunch of hoopla. None of it is it's literally hardly applicable unless you're going to spend your life debating other people and you have to understand the structure of the argument they're using. But I was in this class and the professor was waxing poetically about whatever philosopher we were studying. And this guy's philosophy was somewhat contrary to John Locke. John Locke taught life, liberty, and property were your natural rights. But in Locke's view, your property should be limited to only what you need to suffice yourself and your family. So if I have a family of 5 and we need dinner that night, then my property is as much as the cows it takes to feed my family, but everything else should be open to other people because there's a moral obligation there. And then there was another guy, I can't remember the name of the philosopher, who was arguing that there's no such thing as property just because everything already exists. And you can't have property because the tree already exists. But so what? You took it and made a house out of it. That doesn't make it yours. It's still nature's tree. Just a really stupid argument. But the professor and this kid in my class, who I swear had a photographic memory. He could read things and recite them back, and he knew everything in the book already. He was a really smart, sharp kid. But they were both lacking the common sense gene because they're talking about this guy as if he was brilliant. And I kind of laughed and, chortled a little bit, I'm sure. And I had a good rapport, with the people in the classroom because I enjoy a robust debate and I like to play devil's advocate. But I try to never be mean about it. But so I kind of, type thing. And the professor goes, okay, I'm sure Vermillion has something to say about this. And I said, well, our nature, in and of itself, our nature proves this can't be true. And they go, what does that even mean? I said, well, of course, things are your property just by you possessing them. You're naturally inclined to believe that's your property. So it would take a force contrary to nature to convince you that's not true. Just like things fall out of the sky, right? It would take a force contrary to nature to get me to float. So telling me that can't be your property just because you worked for it and got it, that's contrary to our natural existence. Well, they wanted to argue based on what this guy had said, the kid in 2 rows over. So, I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to get up. I'm going to come over and pick something out of your backpack, and it's mine now. And the kid goes, well, it doesn't work that way. I said, sure it does. If what you're saying is true and nobody has property. Yeah, exactly. If nobody's allowed to have property and things can't be ours because they existed by nature, then I'm going to come pick something out of your backpack and take it with me, and it's mine from today forward. Now you feel awkward, right? If I stand up right now, you're going to feel awkward. Well, yeah, but that's not what he's saying. I don't care what he's saying. That's my whole point. What he's saying is so absurd. It doesn't pass a 15-second test of, if I stand up and come take something out of your bag, is it mine? No. Okay. Why is it not mine? Well, because the law says so. Okay, let's pretend law doesn't exist. It's yours. It's been yours. You made it at home out of whatever. You've put time and sweat equity into it, but I want it. You're telling me it's not yours? Right. So that guy was an idiot. That's the only point I'm trying to make here. And so we had a bit of a laugh about it. Well, we're here to study his philosophy. And I was making the point, but studying that is absurd. I mean, it's not, but it kind of is. The guy's an idiot. I don't mind reading about it, but don't try and sit here and tell me how brilliant he was. It's stupid. It's dumb. It's Marx dumb in a way, like all you got to do is stop and think about that for a minute. And it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, all right, I want to circle back around to Lauren Southern. And then we'll go with our vote of the week, which is a very terrible vote of the week. I hate that this guy even gets to be voted, but it's a terrible story I read. And it's one of those things that if I have to know about it, you're going to have to know about it too. Remember that Lauren Southern got banned from the UK for saying Allah was gay, okay? And Muslims are offended by that. But if Muslims are offended by the fact that Allah is gay, I would like for them to please address the pedophile problem in the Islamic community. And I just want to remind you that this is a thing. Okay, I've read 2 stories just today from recent weeks, and then there's a third that was local of female teachers raping their students. Are you following all these stories? Did you see the woman who was having sex with a kid in the classroom who was 13 years old? Then there's another teacher who has lost her job because she was having a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old boy. We had a teacher here in the Greenville area in a city called Malden, who was caught half naked in her car with a student and is now facing big charges. This idea,
I would tell you, yes, I'm keeping up with it, but that would be a lie because it's so rampant now, or at least my perception due to the media,
right,
has made me think it's so rampant that I actually can't keep up and differentiate.
It's a hard thing because I think we talked about this. I read an article that a friend posted on Facebook. I know she had really good intentions in posting it. There wasn't anything false in the article except for the opinion it was wrapped in. And the opinion of the piece was that white men were the reason sex trafficking is as big as it is. And if you've ever studied sex trafficking minutely for 30 seconds, you find that it's actually a lot more, well, not a lot more. I would say there's a blame on men and women equally of all races and creeds, okay? So to say white men in America are the reason, it's very unfair to white men, and actually I think it's unfair to all the victims who were suffering at the hands of all sorts of people. Human trafficking is a massive problem in Haiti, okay? Human trafficking is a massive problem in the United States. It's a massive problem in Mexico. It's a massive problem in Southeast Asia. It's all over the world. It's very problematic. But then you look at these 3 women, all of them within the last several weeks. If there were 3 white male teachers you could name in the U.S. right now who had recently been accused with hard evidence of raping young women in their classrooms, there would be an outrage in this country. There would be women in the streets saying, see, we've been telling you. That would be a thing.
Lauren, they'd be household names.
You got that right. Bill Clinton. Lauren Southern goes to the UK and says, what if Allah was gay? The Muslims get massively offended. And they act like that's absurd. It's not a thing. Get out here. And why are they so offended? Why are they so offended? Well, I think they're actually offended because homosexuality and child rape is rampant in the Muslim community. Rampant. Almost probably worse than the Catholic priest crisis. And nobody's doing a damn thing about it. Even worse is that the U.S. military knows about this. So let's all remember Dan Quinn for a minute. And before you think I'm being super biased in my source on this, this is from the New York Times. September 21st, 2015. In his last phone call home, Lance Corporal Gregory Buckley Jr. told his father what was troubling him. From his bunk in southern Afghanistan, he could hear Afghan police officers sexually abusing boys that they brought to the base. Quote, at night we can hear them screaming, but we're not allowed to do anything about it. The Marine's father, Gregory Buckley Sr., recalled his son telling him, before he was shot to death at the base in 2012. So this guy knows that child rape is happening on the base, and he's then killed on that very same base. Who do you think killed him? Okay. Rampant sexual abuse of children has long been a problem in Afghanistan, particularly among armed commanders who dominate much of the rural landscape and can bully the population. Right. The practice is called boy play, and American soldiers and Marines have been instructed not to intervene. Remember, this is the Obama military. The Obama military was instructed by the higher-ups that children could be raped. They could know about it, but they could do nothing. This is Obama's legacy. This is his legacy in foreign policy, that children were actively being raped on American military bases in Afghanistan, and he instructed the men to do nothing about it. Not only that, you would be punished if you did, and that's what we're talking about. The policy endured as American forces recruited and organized Afghan militias to help hold territory against the Taliban. But soldiers and Marines have been increasingly troubled that instead of weeding out pedophiles, the American military was arming them in some cases and placing them as commanders of villages and doing little when they began abusing children. Quote, "The reason we were here is because we heard the terrible things that the Taliban were doing to people, how they were taking away human rights," said Dan Quinn, a former Special Forces captain who beat up an American-backed militia commander for keeping a boy chained to his bed as a sex slave. But we were putting people into power who would do things that were worse than the Taliban did. That was something village elders voiced to me. The policy of instructing soldiers to ignore child sexual abuse by their Afghan allies is under scrutiny, particularly as it emerges that service members like Captain Quinn have faced discipline, even career ruining, for disobeying it. After he dished out the beating, the Army relieved Captain Quinn of his command and pulled him from Afghanistan, and then he left the military. I'm telling you this so that you understand that being of the same virtue as Captain Quinn, being a man of morals and principles, and doing whatever was necessary to end the abuse of that child, speaking out against that man's behavior is now illegal in the United Kingdom and can get you banned for life, and you're not allowed to have a weapon to fight back against the people that would implement those laws. Think on that. Think about it. That's where you're headed if you give in to the whiny children of the world who believe that one tragedy means we all live under the umbrella of tyranny together. Ain't going to happen. Not going to happen. Not in a million years. Okay. I'm never going to sleep tonight. All right. Especially after this one.
Me either. Thanks, man.
You're welcome. This is insane. This story is insane. You will tell somebody about this story. Better yet, tell them to come listen to it on the Felt Recoil podcast. A boy was decapitated on a water slide, and now the ride's, quote, visionary creator faces a murder charge. I believe this was from the Washington Post. It is. Kansas City police are investigating the death of a young boy at a water park on August the 7th. He died while riding the 17-story, I don't speak German, but I believe this stands for insane in German, the word, yes. Verrückt, advertised as the world's tallest water slide. In the years before he opened the world's tallest water slide, a 17-story record setter, people in the industry called Jeff Henry a visionary. Now, after a child was decapitated on Henry's ride, and investigators say they found signs of rushed construction and covered-up injuries, prosecutors are calling him a murderer. He owned the water park and several others with his siblings. He was arrested in Cameron County, Texas, on charge of second-degree murder in the death of Caleb Schwab. Schwab was there, by the way, as the son of an elected official in the area. They had a Meet Your Elected Officials Day. He went down the ride and was medically decapitated. In the 2 years that the ride was in operation, 13 people were injured, many after the rafts left the slide. Here's the kicker. This guy and his cohorts built this water slide not based on physics and science, but on trial and error. They were sending crash test dummies down the slide on rafts and seeing what would happen and then adjusting accordingly. There was no...
And it's documented.
Yeah.
In a reality TV show that I think was for the Travel Channel or something like that.
Oh, really? The slide is?
Yes, sir. So that
Holy
slide
moly.
was built purely for reality TV.
According to WDAF TV in Kansas City, an employee tells them we had to ride it 3 times before we actually opened the park every day. They would ask lifeguards who would want to volunteer, and no one would put their hands up. It was like, no, I don't want to do it. They are just making us like, oh, yeah, go test this. It's fine. Even though the test dummies fly off, end of quote. One day, this lifeguard was chosen to be the morning tester. On the 3rd trip down, the raft flipped and crashed into a wall. He went home with a back injury, and a report was never written. 10-year-old Caleb Schwab climbed into the front seat of one of the ride's rafts on August 7th in 2016, which the park had dubbed Elected Official Day. By the end of the minute-long ride, Caleb, the son of Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab, was dead after being decapitated. 2 women riding with him suffered cuts and fractures. Their raft had collided with a metal pole that held the net. Investigators uncovered a string of negligence that they said led back to Henry, the park's founder. Henry had rushed the design process in part because he wanted the ride, as you just said, to be on TV. A simple water slide can require months of calculation, computer modeling, and prototyping by trained engineers, but investigators say the engineers were never directly involved in the conception or design, that Henry and his team completed the prototype within 36 days. All right, read the entire story by going to facebook.com/feltrecoilshow. Most every story you hear mentioned here is always linked there. Okay, did we miss anything? I think not. Oh, we did. We missed one thing. I want to congratulate our new friend, Josh. Josh picked up 3 free meals from HelloFresh last week, and we have 3 more to give away this week, lest I forget. Probably should have done this like half an hour ago if we were professionals, but I'm not. HelloFresh wants you to say hello to Delicious. You can claim your free meals by emailing hellofresh@feltrecoilshow.com. It's really that simple. hellofresh@feltrecoilshow.com. The first person to do so will receive a unique code free of charge. You'll select your favorite meal plan at hellofresh.com. You'll enter the code at checkout, and your first meals will be on us. Cook it, love it, share it, repeat it. I promise you will. The food is incredibly good. I had it tonight before we recorded the podcast. We had melted mozzarella burgers. It was delicious. You're going to want to do it again and again. Just email hellofresh@feltrecoilshow.com. We'll send you the code. And then we'll see you next week. Don't forget to find us online at feltrecoilshow.com. I almost said hellofresh.com. Don't forget to find us online. It's almost did again at feltrecoilshow.com. We have pint glasses and rocks glasses and stickers available there. And when you buy something from us, a large portion of your money, a third of it, is sent to one of the charities listed at our charities of choice there on the website as well. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Felt Recoil Podcast.